And joining us to talk about the latest in terms of the Trump-Russia investigation, as well as the ongoing controversy over James Comey, Professor David Schultz of Hamline University and the University of Minnesota Law School. Thank you so much for coming in on a pretty stormy morning.
Yeah, I dodged the rain.
Dodged rain, braved it from St. Paul. Let me ask you, first of all, about the president's tweets. Once again, what do you think this says about where he is in terms of his thoughts on this investigation and this controversy, this enormous controversy that's engulfing his presidency?
Well, first, I think he thinks after Thursday it's all done and he wants to sort of move on. That's also part sort of his public relations. When in
fact, after Thursday in terms of the testimony?
Yeah. Because his comments clearly right after Comey testified the next day were, what 100% vindication or totally vindicated? Well, he's forgetting the fact that it's just starting. The investigation's starting. But what I thought was fascinating about Thursday is that the debate has shifted in the United States. The debate before that was primarily on Russian involvement in U.S. elections. Now we're starting to see increasingly the debate surrounding, did Trump in fact engage in obstruction of justice when he fired Comey? So the debate has shifted.
However, there is a new poll out that just came out late last night that shows that a majority of Americans trust James Comey more than President Trump by about a 20% margin.
Right.
That same poll, though, shows that in fact most people support, or that most Trump supporters who voted for him overwhelmingly believe that Trump is more trustworthy than Comey by 70%.
Right. Again, no surprise there. We haven't seen the base of Trump's support collapse yet or even erode. And that's important because if we're thinking in terms of congressional investigations, we're not going to see Republicans in the House of Representatives or the Senate turn on Trump or take a more aggressive approach to him until the base starts to erode. But what is more important, though, to understand here is that even though I think he has strong Republican support, his presidency is being consumed by this, and his ability to move his political agenda and his policy agenda is just about halted at this point. And this investigation is going to go into next year by Robert Mueller. So that's the bigger part for him.
All right. Is James Comey in trouble for leaking his own memo to the New York Times?
I don't think he is at this point. And the reason why I don't is that first we can either describe him as perhaps a whistleblower of which he's trying to disclose information that was be pointing to illegal behavior within the executive branch, and we sort of give some grace to people in terms of whistleblowing. But second, he's not releasing any official government documents. He's releasing his own thoughts or his own information. More importantly, I would say here, as the third argument, because Congress has the constitutional authority to compel him to be able to testify, what he released to the New York Times is also what? His testimony.
All right. What about the tapes? I mean, he was very coy, almost flippant on Friday, saying, oh, I'll let you know, and everyone's going to be disappointed. Are there tapes? And if there are, how big a deal is that?
Well, first, I would be surprised if there are not tapes, because just about every president tape records Oval Office conversations, and so they're probably there. If Trump has stopped that practice, that's going to be really interesting in terms of it. But if those tapes do exist, the president will have to turn those over to a special prosecutor or to Congress.
Jeff Sessions scheduled to testify, the Attorney General, before the same Senate committee on Tuesday. It's not clear yet if it's going to be in public or in front of the TV cameras. How significant could that be, especially if it's public? If
it's public, it's going to be significant. And if it's public, it's going to be about the involvement that Jeff Sessions has still had in terms of the Russian investigation, because he said that he was going to recuse himself from that investigation. But nonetheless, there are stories coming out that Jeff Sessions was consulted by Donald Trump in terms of the firing of Comey. So this is all suggesting, at least for the public part of the hearings, what was the Attorney General actually doing? Did he go back on his word?
All right, let's ask you quickly about the Officer Yanez trial. It's gotten through it a lot more quickly than a lot of people thought. Closing arguments tomorrow. This could go to the jury tomorrow. Officer Yanez testified on Friday in a very dramatic fashion, saying that he felt he was going to die. It's unusual, isn't it, for a defendant with this high of stakes to testify?
It usually is, although juries like to hear what the defendant has to say, but usually they don't testify. But the reason why he did here is two or three reasons. First, I think the evidence was going against the defense. Second, I think the case was not about whether or not he actually shot the victim, but instead what he was thinking, what his state of mind was. And so that's what they're trying to find out here.
Could that help him? I mean, couldn't the jurors say he panicked and that was manslaughter?
Well, they can say he panicked, but still what they have to be able to do is to show for manslaughter a certain state of mind, and they have to, more importantly, under the Constitution, have to show that he feared for his life or the public safety. And if he can show that that was an
that's exactly what he said.
Exactly. And if he can show that that was an objectively reasonable belief, that he feared for his life or the public safety, he's justified in using deadly force.
All right, well, Professor Schultz, thank you so much for coming in, especially braving this stormy weather to be with us on this Sunday morning.
I hope my house has power when I get home.
We hope so too.
Thank you.
Sir.